Today I'm testing DLSS 4.5 against DLSS 4 to explore the improvements to image quality across a wide variety of games and scenarios. DLSS 4.5 is an impressive step forward for NVIDIA's upscaling technology. It might not be on the level of DLSS 4 versus DLSS 3, and the performance hit may be larger than expected for owners of older GeForce GPUs, but nevertheless NVIDIA are continuing to improve their upscaler at a decent pace. DLSS 4.5 iterates on DLSS 4 by introducing a second-generation transformer model accelerated using FP8 instructions. NVIDIA claims this model delivers better temporal stability, reduced ghosting, smoother edges, and better lighting. A particular focus for NVIDIA has been the performance mode, where they expect to see the biggest gains in image quality versus performance, but of course DLSS 4.5 is available to use across all the modes. The new DLSS 4.5 super resolution capabilities are accessed through one of two model presets. Preset M is the primary model, which has been optimized for the performance mode and is the recommended DLSS 4.5 preset for other modes as well. Preset L is optimized for the ultra performance mode, and in the NVIDIA app, you still have access to all the previous model presets, including Preset K, which is DLSS 4.0 with the first gen transformer model. Enabling DLSS 4.5 is simple. Install the latest NVIDIA app, head to the Graphics tab, find the game you're playing, and in the driver settings, find DLSS Override Model Presets and set Super Resolution to Preset M. You can also do this globally for all titles, or use NVIDIA's recommended setting, though be aware that using the recommended mode only applies DLSS 4.5 to the performance and ultra performance modes. In other modes like quality, it uses Preset K, which is DLSS 4.0. You can verify that DLSS 4.5 is enabled by using the DLSS statistics view in the NVIDIA overlay and looking for Preset M or Preset L on screen. Before we look at performance,
today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Gigabyte and their Aorus branded GeForce RTX 50 series GPUs supporting NVIDIA's full range of RTX features including DLSS 4.5 upscaling, multi-frame generation, and ray tracing. The Aorus Elite is available as either an RTX 5060 or 5060 Ti 16GB, packing a large heatsink and triple fan cooler with RGB halo, dual bias functionality, and a full-size backplate with massive pass-through area. Then for those of you after more performance, there's the Aorus Master range, which includes the RTX 5070, 5070 Ti, 5080, and 5090 models, with even larger triple fan coolers. The RTX 5090 Master really did impress us when we checked it out with its incredible cooling performance, unique design that's visually impressive, and high quality GPU support, making it one of the best models that we've tested to date. So for more information on Gigabyte's entire range of Aorus RTX 50 series graphics cards, please check the link in the video description.
before exploring DLSS 4.5 image quality, we first need to establish how it performs. This allows us to find the right quality matchups that deliver similar performance. It's especially important with DLSS 4.5 because NVIDIA claim the new model runs slower than DLSS 4.0. They describe this as a minor performance trade-off on RTX 50 and RTX 40 GPUs, which have FP8 acceleration, and a heavier performance impact on RTX 30 and RTX 20 GPUs, which lack native FP8 support. To start with, here's Cyberpunk 2077 running on a GeForce RTX 5070 Ti at 4K using the Ultra Ray Tracing preset. The CPU used here is the 9800X3D. In this configuration, DLSS 4.5 preset M delivers similar performance to DLSS 4.0 preset K. In the quality and balanced modes, DLSS 4.5 is about 5% slower, while in the performance mode, DLSS 4.5 is 3% slower. That's not enough of a performance hit to change the tiers all that much. DLSS 4.5 balanced, for example, is still 12% faster than DLSS 4.0 quality. At 1440p, we see a pretty similar situation. In the quality mode, DLSS 4.5 is 5% slower, and this is reduced to 3% slower in the balanced mode and 2% slower in the performance mode. In Mafia the Old Country, running using the Epic preset, DLSS 4.5 is a little more taxing on the RTX 5070 Ti. The quality mode at 4K runs 9% slower, while balanced and performance both run 5% slower. This equates to about half a tier of performance impact. DLSS 4.5 balanced now sits between DLSS 4.0 quality and balanced in FPS output, while DLSS 4.5 performance is now between DLSS 4.0 balanced and performance. At 1440p, the performance hit isn't quite as large. In this title, we see a 2 to 4% performance impact moving to DLSS 4.5 across the three modes, which is still roughly half a tier of overall impact. It's just a couple of frames though, which is not that significant. Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered runs faster natively, and this means the overhead of running DLSS upscaling has a larger impact on output FPS. DLSS 4.5 is heavier in this title, running 13% slower at 4K comparing quality versus quality. The balanced mode is 9% slower and the performance mode is 6% slower, so this is basically a full tier of performance impact. DLSS 4.5 balanced runs a little slower than DLSS 4.0 quality in this title. At 1440p, the hit is reduced a little bit, but DLSS 4.5 quality still runs 8% slower than DLSS 4.0 quality, while balanced is 5% slower and performance 2% slower. The impact is certainly a lot less at much lower render resolutions like 1440p performance mode, but even at 1440p, there's about one tier of performance impact. To give you an idea of how DLSS 4.5 performs on older architectures, I reran all of these tests on the RTX 3090, which does not support native FP8. In Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K, now DLSS 4.5 quality runs 19% slower than DLSS 4.0 quality, and while this is still better than native at such low base frame rates, it's quite a sizable hit. The balanced and performance modes run 15% slower compared to around a 5% hit on the RTX 5070 Ti. At 1440p, things aren't quite as bad, with an 11%, 9% and 6% hit for the quality, balanced and performance modes respectively. At 4K, we saw about one tier of performance loss using DLSS 4.5, whereas at 1440p, it's about 2/3 of a tier. DLSS 4.5 balanced at 1440p ran a little faster than DLSS 4.0 quality, but not by much. The performance hit in Mafia: The Old Country is similar. At 4K, I recorded DLSS 4.5 running 17%, 15% and 10% slower across the quality, balanced and performance modes. This was about one tier of performance impact, so DLSS 4.5 quality ends up providing a 40% performance increase over native compared to 70% with DLSS 4.0. 1440p also struggled a bit in this title with an 11, 9 and 7% hit across the various modes, so pretty similar to the results in Cyberpunk 2077. DLSS 4.5 balanced ran a little slower than DLSS 4.0 quality. Lastly, the performance hit in Horizon Zero Dawn on the RTX 3090 is pretty massive. DLSS 4.5 quality at 4K was 26% slower than DLSS 4.0 quality, and this made quality upscaling run slower than native TAA rendering, something Steve found in a few titles in his previous performance investigation. The balanced mode was also 25% slower and the performance mode was 17% slower. This is more than 2 tiers of impact, with DLSS 4.5 performance running slower than DLSS 4 quality in this title on the 3090. At 1440p, I recorded a 17, 15 and 12% performance drop using the quality, balanced and performance modes respectively. Not quite as severe as at 4K, but still enough that DLSS 4.5 performance ran worse than DLSS 4.0 quality. Based on these results and our previous performance benchmarks, owners of RTX 40 and RTX 50 series GPUs shouldn't see too much of an impact using DLSS 4.5 instead of DLSS 4.0. At worst, there might be up to one quality tier of impact, but typically less, making the same modes directly comparable, e.g. quality versus quality or performance versus performance for the most part. It's not zero impact, but I don't think you'll find any examples where quality upscaling runs slower than native unless you're at a really high base frame rate. For those with older RTX 30 and RTX 20 series GPUs, Nvidia's guidance seems to be correct. There's a heavier performance impact, and you might want to stick with DLSS 4.0 preset K on those GPUs. In a general sense, I'd expect to see at least one quality tier of performance loss using DLSS 4.5 on these older architectures, if not 2 quality tiers of impact, and it's definitely possible for DLSS 4.5 to run slower than native rendering in some configurations. Now let's get into some quality examples, directly comparing DLSS 4.5 preset M to DLSS 4.0 preset K. If you're wondering where FSR 4 is in these comparisons, I'm going to cover that in detail in a future video, otherwise this investigation would be longer than it already is because we'd have to go over everything multiple times. So let's start with looking at texture quality. DLSS 4 was the first version of Nvidia's upscaler to remove a phenomenon called TAA blur. This is where a game immediately goes from looking relatively sharp when standing still to looking blurry or less detailed in motion. The contrast between these two states, sharp when still, blurry in motion, is why many people used to hate temporal anti-aliasing, often describing it as a blur filter. With this issue being largely resolved in DLSS 4, there are no further enhancements or changes to TAA blur in DLSS 4.5. However, DLSS 4.5 generally produces a sharper image overall, and this applies to both stationary scenes and motion equally. In some games like Horizon Zero Dawn, this effect is especially noticeable, with increased sharpness leading to better perceived detail. In other titles, the improvement is more subtle, though typically it applies across all modes and resolutions, whether we look at 4K quality or 1440p performance. Most of the time, this makes the game look subjectively better, especially when there's a lot of grass or similar sorts of details, though we'll look at foliage more closely later. DLSS 4.5 isn't a universal improvement though. In this scene in Cyberpunk 2077, I noticed moire patterns in the metal ground texture when viewing the preset M output, which are not present in the DLSS 4 preset K output. While preset M is a little sharper overall, it has a texture stability regression in this scene, and this applies whether we look at 4K performance, 4K quality, or even 1440p performance modes. I wouldn't say it's common to see this problem, and in some other moire tests, preset M holds up well, but it's a possibility of occurring. DLSS 4.5 fine detail and edge stability is a side grade compared to DLSS 4. After examining a decent selection of games now, DLSS 4.5 in some situations provides better stability than DLSS 4, and in other situations, stability can be worse. At times, this can be down to the specific mode being used. Here in Ratchet & Clank, using the performance mode, stability is better using preset M when viewing the further away blue float. But as the nearer gold float appears, preset K can have the edge. Now viewing the same scene using the quality mode, and I think preset K is more stable, especially for the further blue float that was actually more stable with preset M using the lower mode. Here's Mafia the Old Country, where this boat has a lot of fine rope detail. Again, using the performance mode, I'd say DLSS 4.5 offers better rope quality, but DLSS 4 at times is a bit more stable with less flicker. But if I switch over to look at this lighthouse, the fine detail on the fence and top of the building are more stable with DLSS 4.5. I saw a similar effect using the quality mode for both, perhaps even more pronounced, where DLSS 4.5 had more flicker but better reconstruction of the ropes. In this sort of scene, I think there's no doubting that DLSS 4 using the quality mode is still better than DLSS 4.5 using the performance mode. But then if we move to, say, the balanced mode at 1440p, now this flicker in the DLSS 4.5 preset M image is even worse and more noticeable. If you took a still screenshot of these two, you'd probably say DLSS 4.5 is better, but the way it handles stability in motion is less pleasing. In the Lighthouse test, I would say both options trade blows. I could continue to look through further examples, but basically this is a recurring theme. Some of the time, the new preset M is superior, and some of the time preset K is superior. Clearly, NVIDIA have adjusted the way the second-gen transformer model reconstructs detail, but it doesn't always pay off for these sorts of fine line elements that are the most prone to aliasing. Disocclusion is greatly improved in DLSS 4.5 and is one of the major upgrades this technology presents. As a refresher, disocclusion is the phenomenon where a foreground object moves, revealing the scene behind it. This is especially relevant in third-person games where you have a character in the foreground moving, and these movements constantly occlude and disocclude the background in a small area around the character. With DLSS 4, disocclusion artifacts were quite common, with a low-resolution sizzling seen in the disoccluded area around a moving third-person character. In The Last of Us Part 1, this was especially obvious, but if we compare DLSS 4 preset K to DLSS 4.5 preset M in the performance mode, DLSS 4.5 is significantly superior, and these disocclusion artifacts are greatly reduced. They're not eliminated entirely because this is very hard to do in upscaling, but the level of sizzling is much less distracting and annoying. This is also the case when viewing higher modes like quality. Disocclusion here has improved to the point where it's quite difficult to spot in real time. Where this artifact is concerned, DLSS 4.5 performance at 4K typically looks superior to DLSS 4 quality, so if you're playing a game using DLSS 4 where disocclusion is especially problematic, switching to DLSS 4.5 should clean up those issues for you. As a sanity check, here is the example we were just looking at in Mafia the Old Country, except this time, instead of focusing on the ship's ropes, now focus on the area around Enzo, the character you play. Disocclusion is better in this example as well, viewing DLSS 4.5, and even if we reduce the resolution all the way down to something like 1440p balanced, DLSS 4.5 disocclusion artifacts are improved. DLSS 4.5 features improved ghosting. Across many of the examples where I saw ghosting with DLSS 4, this ghosting is removed or significantly reduced with DLSS 4.5. Here's one example of this in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. As Ratchet moves across the red carpet with DLSS 4 performance mode at 4K, a trail is left behind along that carpet, which is largely gone when viewing the same mode with DLSS 4.5. In Cyberpunk 2077, I saw some ghosting in DLSS 4 around the streetlights, which is virtually eliminated with DLSS 4.5, and this leads to better edge stability along those elements. In Horizon Zero Dawn, I also saw some particle ghosting, particularly in this very difficult scene as small particles move across a wooden bridge in motion. While DLSS 4.5 doesn't fully eliminate ghosting, it's much harder to spot when viewing this example in both the performance and quality modes at 4K, so typically it looks a lot better. Here's another example in Mafia: The Old Country where ghosting due to disocclusion is removed when using DLSS 4.5, and this is very noticeable in this particular scene. However, sometimes DLSS 4.5 can still produce ghosting on the level of DLSS 4, or even worse, such as here while driving in Mafia. When focusing on the windshield element, there's a noticeable ghost trail that is left behind in some situations, which can be slightly more visible in the DLSS 4.5 image. The performance modes are relatively similar, but quality I would have to give the edge to preset K. With improvements to sharpness, disocclusion, and ghosting, hair quality is improved when using DLSS 4.5. Across a variety of configurations that I looked at, including 4K performance and 1440p balanced, DLSS 4.5 typically produces better hair stability with less grain. This gives hair greater consistency between frames and a higher resolution appearance, especially in the body of the hair. In many scenarios, this can be a subtle improvement though, because hair quality was decent with DLSS 4 as well. The biggest gains are when rendering at lower resolutions, like using 4K performance, but even the quality mode benefits as well. Particle quality has improved slightly with the new DLSS 4.5 model. As I showed in some previous examples, particles are less likely to induce ghosting with preset M, though the resolution and reconstructed detail in the particles themselves is largely similar to DLSS 4 preset K across a variety of situations. Particles are a little sharper thanks to broad sharpness improvements, but the edge quality and level of aliasing I would say is similar to previous versions. It's also possible that DLSS 4.5 particles can look worse overall in some scenes. This is 1440p performance mode looking at snow in Horizon Zero Dawn, and while the DLSS 4.5 image is less streaky in the snow itself, the background is grainier and more pixelated than the DLSS 4 image. This is also the case viewing this scene using the 4K performance mode, and while that pixelation isn't as bad as at 1440p, you can notice this to a small degree during gameplay. DLSS 4.5 does not appear to materially improve how transparencies are handled. Looking at these sorts of elements across a variety of games showed image quality very similar to DLSS 4. Transparent or translucent objects were not a pain point for DLSS 4 previously, so it makes sense that this wasn't a focus when training the new second-gen transformer model. Elements like fire and holograms still look very good using DLSS 4.5, even with relatively low render resolutions like 1440p balanced. One of the larger improvements to DLSS 4.5 image quality relates to foliage, especially trees. Across all the modes I looked at, DLSS 4.5 tree stability is much better than DLSS 4, leading to less shimmering in motion. For example, here's Star Wars Outlaws at 4K using the performance mode, featuring trees and branches in a strong wind. Not only is the DLSS 4.5 image sharper overall, the actual details in the tree are clearer, especially if you look at the lower branches that overlap one another. This is also true when viewing the 4K quality mode, and gets more noticeable when viewing 1440p results. These performance improvements have the biggest benefit in games with high levels of tree detail, such as Mafia: The Old Country. In motion, DLSS 4.5 trees are much more consistent and less prone to shimmering artifacts, which creates a more stable and pleasing presentation. The DLSS 4 image using preset K, even with the quality mode, looks a bit grainy when examining the interior details of tree models. And this isn't just preset M smoothing out and blurring the tree details to prevent motion artifacts. DLSS 4.5 maintains tree detail and crispness while removing shimmering. Like with Disocclusion, this is an area where DLSS 4.5 performance mode typically beats DLSS 4 quality mode in image quality. In the Mafia example at 4K, preset M performance mode is more stable and less grainy than preset K quality. So in games with detailed trees and this sort of motion, it's definitely beneficial switching over to the new DLSS 4.5 model. There are other games where tree quality is similar to DLSS 4, and these are situations where trees are less detailed or don't overlap as much with one another in motion. In the forest area in The Last of Us, for example, I didn't see much difference in quality, but then again DLSS 4 looked excellent in this regard to begin with. The other aspect to talk about is grass quality. In some cases, DLSS 4.5 produces a similar visual improvement to grass as we see from trees and hair. Mafia the Old Country is again a great example of this, where grain and sizzling seen with the grass on the side of the road is reduced using DLSS 4.5. Star Wars Outlaws grass also tends to look a bit sharper and clearer using the new model, with its grass being detailed and constantly in motion. In other titles, the improvements are a bit hit and miss. Horizon Zero Dawn, for example, has better grass reconstruction when using DLSS 4.5, with less blur for some of the fine details seen within the grass areas, but the grass itself is much sharper, and depending on the sorts of things you're doing, this can produce a bit of an over-sharp look, and sometimes even some grain or aliasing relative to the softer DLSS 4 presentation. This is also true in this Ratchet & Clank example when looking at the purple foliage around the road. It's a trade-off though, because clearly some areas to DLSS 4.5 are still superior. I just think with this game, preset M would look better in areas with grass if the sharpness was dialed down slightly while maintaining the reconstruction and stability improvements. Another great test for upscalers is fence quality. With big strides made in Disocclusion, DLSS 4.5 performs much better in the Spider-Man 2 overlapping mesh test than DLSS 4. The fence in the foreground is higher quality, the background fences are not as blurry or garbled, and this creates a presentation with better clarity and better consistency between frames. When comparing DLSS 4.5 4K performance mode to DLSS 4 4K quality mode, we're now in a position where these images trade blows because preset M is significantly better at upscaling this sort of element from a lower render resolution. The difference is even more pronounced at 1440p using the performance mode. DLSS 4 is very blurry and garbled in this scene, whereas DLSS 4.5 is much clearer, and while I wouldn't describe the output as amazing, it's definitely playable. Lastly, a look at lighting quality. Nvidia claims that one of the benefits they've introduced with DLSS 4.5 is performing all upscaling calculations in linear light space before tone mapping, rather than in logarithmic space after tone mapping. According to them, this allows the image to retain its full color and luminance range, while the second-gen transformer model is powerful enough to do so while managing instability. Across the games I looked at, lighting quality is subjectively better with DLSS 4.5, especially for any highlights like bright reflections from the sun, streetlights, or neon signs. These elements are typically brighter, more colorful, and pack more punch when using DLSS 4.5. Though for the most part, DLSS 4.5 doesn't produce a substantially different output in most scenes. It's not like entire scenes are changed, it's a benefit you get on the fringes when there's a lot of highlights on screen. However, there is a trade-off here, which is that DLSS 4.5 is more likely to produce highlight flicker like is seen during these scenes in Cyberpunk 2077. The lights themselves are brighter, but also flicker more during motion, whereas DLSS 4 is dimmer and more stable. Nvidia actually say that previous upscalers and versions of TAA specifically operated in logarithmic space to dampen flicker, and while they claim DLSS 4.5 is powerful enough to manage instability without compressing the data, it seems that it's not quite powerful enough in all situations to eliminate this flicker. And this flicker can appear even using the highest quality modes like 4K quality, so it's not just an issue with lower render resolutions, it seems related to the way the new model operates. So that's DLSS 4.5 and how it compares to DLSS 4. Generally speaking, the new second-gen transformer model produces superior image quality, but it's not quite the same universal improvement that we saw with the DLSS 3 to DLSS 4 upgrade, where you just enable DLSS 4 no matter what. DLSS 4.5 preset M does have some regressions and trade-offs in certain situations that might make the older DLSS 4 preset K a better choice, but on the whole, I do prefer the way DLSS 4.5 looks. The key improvements Nvidia have made relate to disocclusion, sharpness, ghosting, and foliage quality. In titles that previously struggled with ugly disocclusion sizzling or streaky ghosting with DLSS 4 enabled, these issues are cleaned up significantly when using DLSS 4.5. When it comes to these specific artifacts, you'll often find that preset M on the performance mode looks better than preset K on the quality mode. So I'd particularly recommend using DLSS 4.5 in third-person games that are more prone to disocclusion, and especially those with a lot of foliage. To achieve these gains, there are a few visual quality trade-offs. Overall image stability, particularly for fine details, is more of a side grade relative to DLSS 4, and there are some configurations where DLSS 4.5 stability is worse than the previous model. Lighting quality, for example, is improved, but it can introduce flicker. Some textures are more prone to moire patterns than before, and the oversharp look in some games can lead to increased levels of grain in motion. These issues are why I wouldn't say that DLSS 4.5 performance mode is a universal substitute for DLSS 4 quality. There are times it can beat the old model with a lower render resolution, and there are times that it can't. But I think these visual trade-offs are outweighed in most games by the benefits of the new model, so DLSS 4.5 is my pick for the best visual quality overall. On RTX 50 and RTX 40 series GPUs, I would recommend using preset M in most scenarios because the performance hit relative to preset K is small. I know Nvidia recommends this new model for the performance mode and preset K for higher modes, but in a lot of games, I'm happy to accept the 5 to 10% performance hit and use preset M even with DLSS quality upscaling because it does look better. DLSS 4.5 also makes upscaling using lower modes more viable than ever. DLSS 4 was already pretty good using 4K performance or 1440p balanced, but there's understandable hesitancy to use these modes over the quality mode given in previous generations anything below quality wasn't very good. I'd say with DLSS 4.5, there's no better time to try out the lower modes. 4K performance is now extremely usable with great visual quality in motion, and even 1440p performance mode isn't too bad, though I'd personally prefer to use the balanced mode. When you factor in the quality improvements and the performance hit, I think on the latest GPUs, DLSS 4.5 is a net improvement. The performance hit is pretty small in a lot of configurations, and even if you do find it problematic, it can be offset with a lower upscaling mode in the knowledge that DLSS 4.5 is better than ever at rendering from lower resolutions. For those with RTX 20 and RTX 30 series GPUs, it's a bit harder to justify. We're seeing at least a 10% performance hit enabling DLSS 4.5 in the same mode, and in the worst cases, quality upscaling now runs slower than native rendering. You might find DLSS 4.5 is still useful with that sort of performance loss, but the balance between performance and visual improvement isn't anywhere near as good as with the newer architectures. Luckily, preset K still looks great in a lot of games. The other thing to be aware of is that DLSS 4.5 Super Resolution is not currently compatible with ray reconstruction. When you enable ray reconstruction, it uses a combined model that also includes Super Resolution, but this model is still from the DLSS 4 era. If you're playing games with heavy ray tracing, the overall presentation will probably be better using ray reconstruction with DLSS 4 level upscaling than DLSS 4.5 upscaling without ray reconstruction. So hopefully we see Nvidia update the ray reconstruction model to DLSS 4.5 level technology soon. Anyway, soon we'll see how DLSS 4.5 compares to FSR 4 in these same examples, so stay tuned for that. For now, that's it for this investigation. If you do want to support Hardware Unboxed and the independent testing that we do, we have our Patreon. Links to that is in the description below. In there, you'll find some useful things like our Discord chat, monthly live streams, and BTS content. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.